Pretend to be my wife for 1 week. Mountain man begged, fat Obese, virgin to save. Baby winter pressed hard against Silver Creek, Montana, the kind of winter that froze breath midair and made even the strongest men walk faster. Inside Harper's General Store, the stove crackled faintly, fighting against the cold that seeped through every wooden seam. Tabitha Cole stacked cans on the high shelf, trying to ignore the whispers from two women by the counter, whispers she had heard her entire life. They always circled around the same words: too big, too plain, too unwanted. She tried to push the sting aside. Work kept her moving. Moving kept her from feeling. The door slammed open so violently the entire shelf rattled. A gust of snow burst in, swirling across the floorboards. Heads turned. A giant stepped through the doorway. He filled the entrance like a black bear rising on hind legs, broad shoulders wrapped in thick grizzly hide, boots heavy with ice, hair dark and wild beneath the snow caught in it. His beard was untrimmed, his jaw clenched, his eyes, those eyes were pure, frantic fear, and in the crook of his massive arm, swaddled in a thin, worn blanket, a newborn wailed weakly. Someone whispered, "Magnus Ironwood," the mountain man who lived deeper in the wilderness than any man had a right to. Magnus swept the store with his gaze, searching, desperate, until his eyes locked on Tabitha. Something in her stillness, her softness, made him stride to her instantly. Snow melted down his coat, dripping onto the floor. "Miss," he said, breath shaking, "I need your help." Tabitha blinked. "My help?" He adjusted the bundle in his arm, revealing a tiny, feverish face. "Her mother died 3 days ago. I buried Sarah under the pines myself. The baby, my daughter, she's starving. She needs milk, real milk." His voice cracked. "I asked every woman in town. They turned me away. Some slammed doors in my face. Some said a wild man shouldn't have a child at all." Tabitha felt something inside her twist tight. But I don't have milk. I'm not." "I know." He swallowed hard. "But Mrs. Henderson, the midwife, she has milk to spare. She refuses to give me any unless I have a wife. Says she won't help a single man raise a newborn alone." His hand trembled. "Miss, if I don't get milk today, she'll die." Tabitha felt the room shrink around her. People stared, waiting, some amused, some pitying. Her heart pounded so loud she barely heard herself whisper, "But why me?" Magnus lowered his voice. "Because you're the only one who didn't look away when you saw her suffering. Please, pretend to be my wife just for 1 week, long enough to save my daughter." The baby let out a thin, broken cry. Tabitha's chest ached. I'll go with you," she said softly. "I'll help." "Thank you," Magnus breathed, closing his eyes for one fragile second. "You've just saved her life." Mrs. Henderson lived on the edge of Silver Creek in a squat white house with smoke curling gently from the chimney. A rocking chair sat abandoned on the porch, its cushion stiff with frost. As Magnus and Tabitha climbed the steps, the newborn's cries grew thin and raspy, the sound of a life slipping away one breath at a time. Magnus knocked, hard, not out of anger, but fear. After a moment, the door creaked open and Mrs. Henderson appeared, wrapped in a shawl, gray hair pulled back tight. Her small eyes swept over Magnus first, then drifted to the baby in his arms. For a heartbeat, concern flickered through them. Then she saw Tabitha. Her mouth thinned. "That one?" she said, pointing at Tabitha with a sharp finger. "This is your wife?" Magnus straightened. "Yes, this is Tabitha Ironwood." Tabitha nearly choked at hearing the name she'd never worn before, but she forced her chin up. She had promised to help. A baby's life depended on it. Mrs. Henderson looked Tabitha up and down slowly, as though examining livestock at auction. Too young to be a widow, too soft to be a mountain wife, and far too well-fed for a man like him. She clucked her tongue. Strange pairing. Tabitha felt her cheeks heat. It was the same tone she had heard her entire life. Women who saw her size before her humanity. She clasped her hands together to stop their trembling. Magnus's jaw flexed. We didn't come here for your opinions. We came for milk, that's all. Mrs. Henderson folded her arms. And I told you yesterday, I don't give my milk to single men. It's not proper. It's not safe. I've raised 4 children, 3 grandchildren. I know what trouble looks like, and trouble often comes disguised as a desperate man. We're married, Magnus repeated. Prove it. Tabitha stared at her. How would you like us to prove it? Mrs. Henderson's expression was cold, almost triumphant. A kiss. Magnus stiffened. Tabitha's breath hitched. The baby whimpered. If you're husband and wife, Mrs. Henderson said, it shouldn't trouble you to show it. Silence fell heavy as snow between them. Magnus looked down at Tabitha, guilt in his eyes. He leaned closer, his voice low so only she could hear. I'm sorry. I wouldn't ask, but she won't give us the milk without this. Tabitha nodded once. Her heart pounded hard enough to shake her ribs. It's all right, she whispered. For the baby. Magnus touched her cheek gently, as though she was something delicate. Then he kissed her. Not a showman's kiss, not a stranger's claim, but something hesitant and warm. 2 lonely souls meeting in the cold. When he pulled back, Tabitha felt the world tilt under her feet. It was the first time anyone had ever touched her with tenderness. Mrs. Henderson sniffed, unconvinced, but no longer outwardly defiant. Fine. Bring the child inside. The warmth of the midwife's kitchen embraced them as they entered. A fire glowed in the stove, and jars of herbs lined the shelves. Mrs. Henderson took the baby, examined her with firm, practiced hands, then sat in a rocking chair and pressed the infant gently to her breast. Hope latched immediately. The sound of her swallowing, small, desperate, broke something open inside Tabitha. There was relief, yes, but also a strange ache she couldn't name. Magnus exhaled deeply, shoulders sagging. Thank you, he murmured. Mrs. Henderson rocked slowly. She's badly underfed. Bring her tomorrow at the same time, and every day after until she's strong enough. Her gaze flicked to Tabitha. And the 2 of you had best keep your stories straight. If I catch so much as a crack of falsehood, I'll turn you both out. Tabitha swallowed. We understand. Outside again, snow falling in soft flakes, Magnus paused at the bottom of the steps. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked unsure. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable. Tabitha clutched her shawl tight. It's fine. It was just part of the act. But her cheeks were still warm, her pulse still unsettled. Magnus stared at her a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he shifted the baby in his arms, his voice low. Let's get her home. They walked toward the mountains together, the first threads of something unexpected winding quietly between them. The trail toward Magnus's cabin wound through the pines like a narrow ribbon of white. Snow fell steady, slow, the kind that muted the world until even breathing felt loud. Tabitha walked beside Magnus, her boots crunching quietly, her breath forming pale clouds in the cold air. He carried the baby with a gentleness at odds with his size, holding her close to his chest to shield her from the wind. Every so often he glanced at Tabitha, as if making sure she was still there, as if he still couldn't believe she'd said yes. She kept her gaze forward. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but unfamiliar, filled with questions neither dared to speak. After nearly an hour of climbing, Magnus finally pointed ahead. There. Through the falling snow, Tabitha saw a cabin nestled between two immense pines. Smoke drifted from the stone chimney. A chopping block covered in frost stood near the door. Beside it lay a stack of split logs, neatly arranged. The place radiated a kind of quiet resilience. Strong, weather-beaten, lived in by a man who knew hardship and made peace with it. Magnus pushed open the door. Warmth rushed out to meet them. Tabitha stepped inside and stopped, surprised by what she saw. She had expected chaos. A rugged man living alone with a newborn could hardly be tidy. Instead, the cabin was carefully kept. A long wooden table stood beneath the window. A weaving basket full of blankets rested by the hearth. On the wall hung a shelf of books, their spines worn from use. The room smelled faintly of pine and simmering broth. "I cleaned before I went to town," Magnus said quietly, almost embarrassed. "Didn't want the place to look unfit for a baby." Tabitha offered a small smile. "It's lovely." He carried Hope to the rocking cradle near the fire. "Sarah made this," he murmured, brushing a hand along its curved edge. "Carved every inch by hand. She wanted it ready before winter." Tabitha watched him a moment, the grief in his voice settling over the room like a shadow. She clasped her hands to stop herself from reaching for him. Magnus cleared his throat, pushing the moment aside. "You must be cold. Sit by the fire. I'll heat water for tea." Tabitha removed her shawl and sat near the hearth. Her fingers tingled as warmth returned to them. She watched Magnus move around the cabin, his size making every step look too large for the small space, yet he navigated it with surprising gentleness. He tended to the baby, stirred the pot over the fire, and set a kettle on the iron hook. Finally, he sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "We should talk about the arrangement." Tabitha nodded, her heart thumping. "Yes, we should." "We only need to pretend in front of Mrs. Henderson," he said. "Here, we live normally. You'll have the bedroom. I'll sleep in the smaller room with the baby. You're not beholden to anything more." Tabitha looked down at her hands. "I understand. And if anyone from town asks, we keep the story straight. Married a year. Moved up the mountain to prepare for the baby. Simple enough." Tabitha swallowed. "A whole year?" "That's what we told her," he said gently. "We have to make it believable." She nodded again. The thought of pretending to be his wife unsettled her, not because she feared him, but because of how easily her heart had reacted to his presence. That kiss at the midwife's house still lingered on her lips, warm and confusing. The kettle whistled softly. Magnus poured tea into 2 tin cups. Tabitha wrapped her hands around hers, letting the heat seep into her palms. "You didn't ask for any of this," he said quietly. "I know the town hasn't been kind to you. I know stepping into this role might bring trouble." Tabitha met his eyes for the first time since they'd left the store. "I didn't do it for the town, and I didn't do it because I wanted anything from you." Her voice softened. "I did it because no child deserves to suffer, and because you look like a man who's been carrying too much weight alone." Magnus blinked slowly, as though her words had struck something deep. "I have," he admitted, "and I thought I could bear it all. But losing Sarah—" His voice broke. He steadied it. "Hope is the only piece of her I have left. I'd die before I let that little one go cold or hungry." Tabitha felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "You won't lose her, not while I'm here." The cradle rocked gently as Hope shifted in her sleep. The fire cracked, sending sparks upward. Outside, the snow fell steadily against the window pane. Magnus leaned back, studying Tabitha with a softened gaze. "Thank you," he said again, almost in a whisper. She smiled faintly. "It's only for a week." But both of them felt, even then, that something had begun between those simple words. Something neither had expected nor asked for, but something that felt fragile and strangely right. The kind of beginning that made the cabin feel warmer than the fire itself. The week that was supposed to be nothing more than a temporary arrangement began with the soft creak of cabin floorboards at dawn, and the faint, hungry whimpers of little Hope. Tabitha woke before Magnus every morning, slipping quietly from the large bedroom into the warm glow of the hearth. She moved with a gentleness the cabin seemed to recognize. When Magnus finally rose, he would find her already rocking the cradle, humming a tune so soft he could barely catch its melody. "You don't have to do that," he would say, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Tabitha always answered the same way. "I know, but I want to." Each day unfolded in a rhythm neither of them had expected. She swept the floors while Magnus chopped wood outside. She simmered soup while he repaired the trough behind the cabin. Sometimes they worked in silence. Other times their voices wove through the small space, learning each other in fragments, stories told not in confession, but in little pieces, like stitching a quilt one square at a time. Magnus told her about growing up in the Sawtooth Mountains, how his father had died in a mining collapse when he was 9, how he'd learned to trap and hunt and build with his hands before he could read a newspaper. Tabitha told him about her mother's laugh, about her father's woodworking shop, about winters spent sewing blankets to earn enough money to keep the family fed. They never spoke of the town's cruelty. They didn't need to. The silence around that truth was comfortable, as though both knew the other understood too well. By the 4th morning, Tabitha began cooking breakfast. Biscuits made from the little flour Magnus had, eggs from the hens in the shed, slices of salt pork fried crisp. Magnus, who had spent years eating whatever he could hunt or cure, watched her cook with a mixture of awe and guilt. "You shouldn't work so hard," he murmured, handing her the kettle. "Cooking doesn't feel like work," she replied, stirring the pot. "Not when it's for people who appreciate it." The warmth in her voice startled him. He didn't realize how long it had been since anyone cooked for him with care rather than duty. Hope was gaining strength quickly. After each visit to Mrs. Henderson, she returned with more color in her cheeks and more energy in her cry. Magnus started smiling again, not the restrained, polite smile he had offered strangers, but the quiet, unguarded one that made his eyes soften at the edges. One afternoon, Tabitha carried Hope outside to feel the weak winter sunlight. The snow sparkled under the pines, and Magnus was splitting logs nearby. He paused when he saw them, leaning on his axe. Tabitha cradled Hope against her chest, speaking to the infant in a soft murmur that melted into the crisp air. Magnus set down the axe. "You're a natural," he said. Tabitha looked up, surprised. "A natural? With her? With everything?" He gestured loosely. "You fit into this place like you've always been here?" Tabitha felt her heartbeat quicken. "It's easy to care for someone like Hope?" Magnus hesitated before answering. "Hope's not the only one who benefits from you." The words hung between them, fragile as frost on a branch. Tabitha didn't know what to say. Magnus didn't know how to take the words back. So he didn't. He let them stay, real and unpolished. That evening, the wind roared through the trees like a warning from the mountains themselves. The cabin shook softly, but the fire inside burned bright. Magnus returned from the shed with a bundle of kindling, snow clinging to his hair and beard. Tabitha laughed quietly as he stamped the cold from his boots. "You brought half the snow inside with you," she teased. "It follows me home," he said with a shrug, brushing his coat. "Can't get rid of it." She handed him a towel, and he dried his hair by the fire while Hope slept. They sat across from each other at the table, sharing a simple meal of stew and biscuits. Magnus ate slowly, watching Tabitha between bites. "You still comfortable here?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "More than I expected." "I'm glad," he replied. "I worried it would feel forced." Tabitha smiled faintly. "It doesn't." Later, as the wind howled and the fire cracked, Magnus showed her how to split kindling. He stood behind her, guiding her hands on the handle. His breath brushed her ear. His chest nearly touched her back. Tabitha felt her knees weaken, not from the effort, but from the nearness. "You don't have to hold my hands," she whispered, though she didn't pull away. "I know," he said, "but I want to make sure you're safe." The axe came down clean, splitting the log neatly. Tabitha exhaled, and Magnus stepped back, a faint flush touching his cheeks. He cleared his throat. "You did well. You taught well." For a moment their eyes met, not as strangers tied by necessity, not as actors pretending to be husband and wife, but as two people caught in the quiet pull of something new. Before either of them could speak, Hope stirred in the cradle. Tabitha went to her, humming softly, and Magnus watched her with a heaviness in his chest he couldn't explain. He had loved once, deeply, and he had lost. The idea of feeling anything again terrified him, but watching Tabitha sway with Hope in her arms, he felt something shift, something gentle, something undeniable. That night, long after Tabitha had gone to her room, Magnus sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames. The house no longer felt like a place of mourning. It felt like a home, breathing again. And he wasn't sure what scared him more, losing the peace she brought, or admitting how much he wanted her to stay after the week was over. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something warm and fragile was beginning to grow. The storm had barely passed when trouble began to gather beyond the tree line. At first it came only as whispers. Strangers seen riding near the foothills, a wagon with a broken wheel left abandoned on the trail, fresh boot prints that didn't belong to any trapper or ranch hand Magnus knew. But whispers in the mountains carried weight. Nothing happened without reason. Tabitha felt the change in him before he ever spoke of it. She noticed it in the way he scanned the woods before stepping outside, the pause he gave before unlatching the door, the way his hand lingered closer to the rifle mounted near the hearth. Hope was too young to understand, but she felt it too, turning restless in her cradle whenever the wind shifted. On the third day after the storm, Magnus returned from checking his traps in the lower valley, long after dark. Snow clung to his boots, but it was not the cold that tightened his jaw. Tabitha stood by the table drying dishes. When he stepped into the light, she stopped mid-motion. "Something's wrong," she said. Magnus hesitated before answering. "Tracks. 4 men on horseback. They weren't following game." His tone was low, measured. "They were following the creek. Upward. Toward us?" He didn't nod. He didn't have to. Tabitha set down the towel. "Is it the town? Someone from Silver Creek?" "No," Magnus said. "Town folk don't wander this far unless they have reason. These were hired men, armed." She stepped closer. "Why would anyone want to come here?" Magnus exhaled through his nose. The look he gave her was half reluctant, half resigned. "I need to tell you something about Sarah." Tabitha held still. She had wondered, quietly, many nights, about the shadow behind the tenderness in his voice whenever he spoke of his late wife. Magnus took a breath. "She wasn't just my wife. She was the daughter of a man with money, not mountain money, railroad money." His fingers curled into his palm. "Her father hated me, said I dragged her into the wilderness, said she deserved silk and society, not a cabin and a trapper's life." Tabitha's voice softened. "But she chose you." "She did." His jaw tightened. "And when she died, her father blamed me. He said I'd stolen her future. He vowed to take something back." Tabitha felt the air cool around her. "Hope." Magnus nodded once. "He threatened it before. Said a child didn't belong in a place like this. Said he had lawyers, influence. He could take her, and I wouldn't stand a chance in court." Would he come himself?" "No," Magnus said. "He'd pay others to do what he hasn't the spine to." Tabitha's heart pounded. "Those 4 men—" "They're scouts," Magnus said. "More will follow. And if they find out—" He stopped, his voice thickening. "If they learn I'm not truly married, they'll use it against me. They'll say I can't raise Hope alone, that the cabin is unfit, that I'm unfit." Tabitha swallowed hard. "But we were going to marry only for a week, just to help Hope. You said—" "I know what I said." Magnus stepped closer. "But this isn't about a week anymore. Their lawyers won't care that we pretended for a good reason. They'll twist it into something ugly. They'll drag you through the mud, and they'll take Hope." Her world tilted for a moment. The child who cried for her at night. The little hand curled around her thumb. The softness of Magnus's voice when he soothed his daughter. She couldn't imagine anyone ripping the baby from this home. "What do we do?" she whispered. Magnus looked at her, really looked, his eyes shifting between fear, longing, and something deeper. "I need to know if you trust me. Truly trust me." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "And if I asked you to stay not for a week, not as a favor, but to stay because this home needs you, would you?" Her voice caught in her throat. "Is that what you want?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped toward the cradle. Hope stirred, her tiny fist grasping the air. Magnus brushed a hand across her cheek with a tenderness that bent Tabitha's knees. "What I want," he said quietly, "is for her to grow up knowing safety, knowing warmth, knowing a mother's voice and a father's love." He turned, meeting Tabitha's gaze. "But this isn't just about what I want. It's about what you want. And I won't trap you the way life has trapped me." Tabitha felt her own secrets rising, things she had never admitted aloud. "I've lived invisible my whole life," she said. "People see my size before they see me. They laugh, they sneer, they pity. I thought that was all I would ever know. But here," her voice shook, Here I feel seen, not judged, not mocked, just here. Magnus swallowed, and it was the most vulnerable she had ever seen him. You deserve to be seen, he murmured, and you deserve not to be alone, she whispered back. The wind slammed against the door, rattling the cabin. Hope whimpered. The fire hissed. Magnus stepped closer. More men will come. They'll climb the ridge within days, maybe sooner. Tabitha didn't shy away. Then I'll stand here with you. A silence fell, not empty, but filled with a quiet promise that neither had the courage to name. She touched his arm gently. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Magnus exhaled, a breath that carried fear, relief, and something dangerously close to hope. Then I'll prepare the cabin, he said. And you stay close. I won't let them take her or you. Outside, the wind carried the distant echo of hooves moving up the valley, danger inching nearer. Inside, two hearts braced themselves against the storm they could no longer outrun. Snow fell hard the next morning, thick flakes swirling like pale ash across the valley. The mountains seemed to hold their breath beneath the weight of the storm. Tabitha moved quietly through the cabin, feeding hope, stoking the fire, listening to every creak of the wind with her pulse lodged high in her throat. Magnus, meanwhile, prepared with the silent precision of a man who had survived the wilderness by learning to anticipate its threats. He checked the rifle, checked the axe, reinforced the door with a crossbar he'd carved during the long nights after Sarah's death. The cabin had seen storms, blizzards, wolves, hungry men, but this felt different. This time, danger wore boots and intention. Not long after noon, hope stirred restlessly. That was when the first knock came, not gentle, not hesitant, but the strike of gloved knuckles against wood. Tabitha froze. Magnus placed a hand on her arm before she could move. "I'll answer," he whispered. He stepped to the door, rifle in hand, and lifted the bar. When he pulled the door open, icy wind knifed into the cabin, whipping the fire behind him. 3 men stood outside, heavy coats, broad hats, pistols at their hips, and arrogance in their eyes. Hired men, just as Magnus had feared. The tallest spoke first. "You Magnus Ironwood?" Magnus didn't flinch. "I am. We come on behalf of Mr. Thorne. He wants what's his by blood." Hope whimpered from inside the cabin. The sound caught one of the men's attention. "Baby's here, then," he said, smirking. "Makes things easier." Tabitha's breath caught. Magnus stepped forward, blocking their view. "You tell Thorne his threats mean nothing up here," Magnus said calmly. "This is my home, my daughter. You've no claim." The tall man shifted his weight, unimpressed. "Your daughter? Interesting you say so. Town records show no marriage, no witness, no union at all." Magnus's jaw tightened. "So tell me," the man continued, voice dripping with false pity, "how's a wild mountain man plan on raising an infant alone?" Tabitha stepped forward before Magnus could stop her. "He's not alone." 3 pairs of eyes darted past Magnus to her. Magnus swallowed hard, but she kept walking until she stood at his side, her chin lifted, her voice steady, though her knees trembled. "I am his wife," she said, "and that child is mine." For a moment, the world outside fell silent. The tall man snorted. "Wife? You expect us to believe that?" Magnus slid an arm around Tabitha's back, drawing her close. "Believe what you want," he growled, "but you'll go back down this mountain empty-handed." The men exchanged glances. The tall one stepped forward. "We don't leave without the girl. Move aside." Magnus leveled the rifle. One more step, and you won't leave at all. The tension snapped like a trap springing shut. One of the hired men drew his pistol. Magnus fired first. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder. The man fell into the snow. Chaos erupted. The second man lunged with a knife. Magnus swung the rifle stock, knocking him down. The third fired blindly toward the cabin, the bullet splintering the doorframe. Tabitha gasped, shielding Hope with her body. Magnus roared, an animal sound ripped from a place deeper than rage, and tackled the gunman into the snow. The struggle was brutal, heavy. Magnus fought with the desperation of a man protecting everything left of his life. Snow stained with blood. The gunman tried to wrestle free, reaching for his pistol. Magnus's fist came down once, twice. The man went still. When it was over, Magnus stumbled back, breath ragged, hands shaking. The wind howled between them. Two men lay motionless. One groaned, crawling away through the snow. Magnus let him go. Tabitha rushed outside. Hope clutched close, tears burning in her eyes. "Magnus," she breathed, her voice breaking as she touched his cheek. Are you hurt?" He shook his head, though blood streaked his temple. "I'm all right. Are you two safe?" Tabitha nodded. "Because of you." Magnus looked down at her, really looked, and something inside him softened. Relief, fear, love, all tangled together. "They'll return," he said quietly. "Thorn won't stop." Tabitha tightened her hold on Hope and whispered, "Then we won't face it apart." Magnus closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words settle into the deepest, loneliest places of him. "You're my family," he murmured. "Both of you, and I'll fight the world if I must." The storm raged on. But inside that frozen valley, beneath falling snow, a vow was forged stronger than iron. Snow softened the world into silence after the fight. For the first time in hours, the valley held still, as if the mountains themselves paused to watch what would become of the little cabin tucked against their slopes. Magnus barred the door, set the rifle aside, and washed the blood from his hands with water that steamed in the cold air. Tabitha held Hope close, rocking her gently, even though the baby had already fallen asleep against her shoulder. Her movements were steady, careful, as though she feared one wrong breath might break the fragile peace settling over them. When Magnus finally turned toward them, the firelight caught the weariness on his face. Not the exhaustion of the body, but the deeper kind, the exhaustion of a man who had carried too much for too long. Tabitha rose slowly, walking to him. She placed her hand on his arm, her touch warm and gentle. "You protected us," she whispered. Magnus shook his head. "You protected Hope. You stood beside me when you didn't have to." "I did it because this is my home now," she said softly. If you'll have me." The words hovered between them, quiet but certain. Magnus drew a long breath. "Tabitha, I asked you to pretend for a week. I never meant to trap you in something that wasn't yours to choose." She looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Do I look trapped?" Magnus's eyes softened. Those wild, storm-colored eyes she had once feared, now gentled like thawing ice. He reached out, touching her cheek with the back of his fingers, a gesture so cautious she felt tears rise without warning. "You saved my daughter," he murmured. "You saved my home, and somewhere along the way, you saved me too." Tabitha swallowed the thickness in her throat. "I didn't come here to replace Sarah." "No," Magnus said. "You came here to be you, and that's what this home needed." The fire crackled softly. Snow tapped against the window pane. Hope shifted in her sleep, her tiny fingers curling near her face. Tabitha watched her for a moment before she whispered, "The men who came today, they won't stop, will they?" Magnus looked into the flames, his jaw set with quiet resolve. Thorn will send more, but now he knows something he didn't before. "What's that?" Tabitha asked. "That this family is not alone," he said, "and that I will not hand over the people I love." The word love passed between them, unforced, undeniable. Tabitha felt warmth bloom in her chest, a warmth she had never known in her scattered, lonely life. Magnus brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're safe here," he said, "if you want to stay, if you'll have this place as yours." Tabitha's eyes glimmered. "I already do." They stood there for a long moment, 3 lives gathered in the soft glow of the fire, bound not by blood or promise forced upon them, but by something steadier and more enduring. Outside, danger still waited. The world had not grown kinder, but inside the cabin hope breathed, small, warm, and stubborn as a flame, refusing to die. Later, when the fire burned low and hope slept soundly, Tabitha looked around the cabin and whispered the question that lingered like a prayer. "Is love strong enough to fight all that's coming?" Magnus didn't answer with words. He simply slipped his hand into hers, held it firmly, and let the quiet promise fill the space between them. Stories like Tabitha and Magnus's remind us how families are sometimes built not from blood or planning, but from the unexpected gentleness we offer one another in our hardest hours. When you sit with this tale, it feels as though we're sharing the same quiet fire, no matter how far away your own home may be. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Montana plains, a busy city street, a small town half a world away. And if you still believe love can rise from places no one expects, stay close. Another story will find you soon. "I'm too old for this," Mountain Man said, until fat obese girl proved him wrong. Winter pressed hard against the Rocky Mountains in 1879, the kind of brutal cold that swallowed sound and stilled even the bravest creatures. Inside a lonely cabin halfway up the ridge, Ezra Thornwood sat hunched beside the fire, a blanket pulled over his broad, aging shoulders. At 58, his beard had gone silver, his hair hung in long frost-touched strands, and the lines etched across his face told stories no one else was alive to hear. He watched the flames curl upward, felt their warmth against his bones, and muttered a truth he'd repeated many nights before. "I'm too old for this. Too old for hoping, too old for loving, too old for starting again." His voice cracked like old timber. 35 years had passed since the disease took his wife and his newborn son, leaving him swallowed by a silence and mountains too big for a heart as worn as his. He had built his life around solitude, trapping, hunting, tending to the same cabin year after year. No visitors, no company, no reasons to imagine anything different. "Maybe this winter will finish the job," he whispered, staring toward the snow piling against the window. "Maybe it's time." And then came the knock, a faint, fragile tapping, the kind born from desperation, not strength. Ezra stiffened. No one climbed this far up the ridge unless they were running from something or dying from the cold. He opened the door. A young woman collapsed into his arms. Her body was soft and heavy with exhaustion, wrapped in a torn brown dress stiff with ice. Long black hair hung in frozen clumps around her face, lips blue, skin shaken violently beneath the layers of snow. Her eyes fluttered open for a single moment, wide, terrified, pleading. "My name is Seraphina," she whispered. I, I'm lost. Please, don't let them find me." Then she went limp. Ezra carried her inside, shutting the wind out with one swift motion. He laid her near the fire, stripping the soaked fabric from her shoulders, wrapping her in thick quilts. Her breath came in shallow puffs. He heated water, forcing tiny sips past her cracked lips, rubbing life back into her frozen hands. He stayed awake the entire night, feeding the fire, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Every time she stirred, he murmured reassurance. Every time she whimpered, he tightened the blankets. By dawn, Seraphina's eyes opened again, soft brown, filled with tears and confusion. "You saved me," she whispered. Ezra shook his head slowly, the truth heavy in his voice. "No, I just opened the door. Now tell me, who were you running from in a storm like this?" He didn't know it yet, but this girl, the one he thought himself too old to save, was about to rewrite the rest of his life. For a long moment, Seraphina simply lay there, breathing in the warmth as if she couldn't believe it was real. The fire painted her cheeks a trembling pink, thawing the frostbite that had kissed her skin. Ezra sat across from her, elbows braced on his knees, waiting, not impatiently, but with the quiet steadiness of a man who'd carried more ghosts than most people ever would. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin and ragged. "I'm from Blackwater," she whispered. "My father, he tried to sell me." Ezra didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. Seraphina swallowed hard. "His name is Silas. He gambles, drinks, owes money to half the men in town. Last week he came home furious, said I was the reason for his shame, said I was too fat to ever marry, too useless to keep." Her eyes glistened. Ezra waited. "He told me I was worth something only if I could pay off his debt. So he arranged a deal with a man named Cornelius, an old man, wealthy, cruel. He wanted me as a second wife, a house servant, a thing he could command." Ezra's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice low. "Did you agree to it?" Seraphina shook her head violently, tears spilling. "I begged him not to do it. I told him I'd work. I told him I'd take extra jobs, cleaning houses, cooking, anything. But he didn't care. He hit me when I resisted. Said a girl built like me should be grateful anyone wanted her at all." Ezra's breath deepened, controlled. "So you ran." "I escaped in the night," she whispered. "Before dawn. I took nothing but my coat and a loaf of bread. But my father, he hired bounty hunters, said whoever brought me back would get $20. A shiver ran through her, not from cold, but memory. "I saw their torches behind me. I kept running until I couldn't tell night from snow. When the storm hit, I thought I was dead." She looked at him then, really looked, at his weathered face, his silver hair, his steady hands. "And then I found you," she said softly. "Your cabin was the only light I saw." Ezra rubbed a hand across his beard, exhaling slowly. "Men like your father, I've known too many of them." "They all say the same things," Seraphina whispered, "that I'm too big, too slow, too much, that no man would ever want me." Ezra's gaze lifted, meeting hers with a steadiness that stopped her breath. "They're wrong." Seraphina blinked, stunned. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Ezra said. "I know what fear looks like, and I know what kindness looks like. You haven't known much of either in the right places." She lowered her eyes. "I didn't want to die out there, but at least dying in the snow would have been my choice." Ezra leaned forward, voice gentler than she expected. Listen to me. Whatever lies those men fed you, your weight, your worth, your place, they were meant to break you, not define you. Serafina covered her face with trembling hands. I'm sorry. I don't mean to burden you. Ezra shook his head. You are not a burden. You're a guest who needed help. But why help me? She whispered. Why not leave me in the snow where you found me? You don't even know what danger follows me. Ezra's expression shifted, something raw flickering beneath the strength he carried. He turned toward the fire as if looking backward into a memory. My wife died young, he said quietly, and my son with her. I wasn't there to protect them from the fever. I've carried that guilt for more than half my life. Serafina's breath caught. Ezra continued, softer. Since then, every winter, I've told myself I'm too old for second chances, too old to start over, too old to care again. He looked over at her now, eyes deep and tired but no longer empty. But when I opened that door and saw you collapsed in the snow, something in me woke up. Serafina's lips parted. What woke up? A reminder, he murmured, that life isn't finished with me yet. Silence washed through the cabin, warm, slow, full. Serafina hugged the blanket around her, voice barely above a whisper. What will you do with me now? Ezra rose to his feet, his shadow tall against the firelit wall. Nothing you don't want, he said firmly. You'll stay until the storm clears. You'll stay until you heal. And if danger comes knocking, they'll deal with me before they ever touch you. Her throat tightened. Why? Why would you protect me? Ezra looked at her as though seeing beyond her fear, beyond her body, into the part of her that had been overlooked her whole life. Because no one ever protected you before, he said, and because I'm not too old to do the right thing. She broke into silent tears, not of fear this time, but of unexpected safety. Outside, the wind howled across the mountains. Inside, for the first time in years, Ezra Thornwood felt something like purpose stir quietly in his chest. The storm lingered for 3 more days, snow piling high enough to bury the fence posts outside the cabin. Ezra kept the fire fed, moving with the same deliberate strength he'd built over decades of mountain winters. Serafina spent much of that time resting, recovering, wrapped in quilts so thick she looked like a cocoon waiting to open. But as her strength returned, so did the awkwardness. On the 4th morning, she tried to stand and nearly fell. Ezra crossed the room in 2 strides, catching her before she hit the floor. Easy, he murmured. She steadied herself with a hand against his chest. Broad, warm, solid. The touch startled them both. Serafina jerked her hand back, cheeks coloring with embarrassment. Sorry, she whispered. Ezra stepped back, clearing his throat. No harm done. Still weak, that's all. But the air had shifted, something unspoken flickering between them before drifting apart like smoke. They moved through the next hours in a careful dance. Ezra showed her how to make fresh tea from dried mint leaves. Serafina insisted on helping, though her hands trembled. When she spilled water on the table, she flinched, waiting for anger that never came. Ezra only handed her a cloth. It happens. She blinked at him, as if trying to understand the simplicity of the statement. No one had ever let her be imperfect without punishment. Later, she watched as he chopped wood outside. Even at 58, Ezra swung the axe with practiced precision, each strike sending crisp echoes across the snowy clearing. His breath rose in white clouds. The worn muscles in his arms flexed beneath his coat. He looked strong, not youthful, but sturdy in a way that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. This man had every reason to remain closed off, yet he'd opened his home and his time to her. When he returned inside, brushing snow from his shoulders, she was stirring stew over the fire. "I wanted to help," she said softly. "I need to contribute something." Ezra hung his coat near the hearth. "You owe me nothing." She shook her head. "I'm not doing it because I owe you. I'm doing it because I want to." He paused, as if tasting her words, then nodded once. "Then thank you." They shared the meal together at the small table. Serafina ate slowly, savoring the warmth spreading through her. Ezra ate in silence, though she caught him glancing at her every so often, as if checking to make sure she was really there. When she finally spoke, it came out small and uncertain. "Do you really think I can stay until the danger passes?" Ezra set down his fork. "You'll stay as long as you need." "You're not bothered by me being here? By my size? By—" He cut her off with a gentle firmness. "Your size is the least important thing about you." She fell silent, stunned. Ezra pushed his plate away and leaned back. "When my wife was alive, she thought softness was weakness. She valued appearance above character. It's a belief that killed her kindness before it killed her body." Serafina didn't know what to say. Ezra continued, "I've lived alone for 35 years because I couldn't bear the thought of caring again. But you being here—" He exhaled slowly, carefully. "It hasn't been the burden I feared." Her voice trembled. "Then what has it been?" Ezra hesitated, a man unused to exposing the delicate parts of himself. "A reminder that I'm not as finished as I thought." Serafina lowered her eyes to her hands. "I don't want to be a reminder of anything painful." "You're not," he said softly. "You're different." Different. The word settled into her chest like a warm stone. Different wasn't the insult she'd grown up hearing. It was something gentler, something she didn't yet know how to hold. As night fell, Serafina helped him stack more wood by the hearth. When she bent to place another log, her knee buckled again. She gasped as she tipped forward. Ezra caught her. Again. Her breath tangled with his. Only inches separated their faces. Firelight played across his silver hair, shadowed his cheekbones, softened the lines around his eyes. For the first time, Serafina saw not an old man, but a man with depth. Tired, yes, but strong, carved by loss and solitude, yet still gentle when he didn't have to be. "I'm too old to be catching people like this," he muttered, though his hands held her carefully, as if she were something worth protecting. Serafina's laugh was shaky, barely formed. "And I'm too big to be falling into you." "You're not too big," he said almost sharply, surprising them both with a conviction in his voice. "You're just you." She swallowed. "Is that a good thing?" Ezra released her slowly, as though afraid she might break. "It's a better thing than I know how to explain." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat gruffly. "You should rest. Storm's easing tomorrow. We'll fetch more supplies then." She nodded and went to her room, though her pulse still beat fast from something that had nothing to do with the fall. Ezra stood alone by the fire long after she'd gone. The storm outside had nothing on the one stirring quietly inside him. He had expected a stranger at his door. He hadn't expected a reason to feel alive again. The storm broke at last, leaving the world wrapped in a fresh blanket of untouched snow. Sunlight glinted off every surface, dazzling and quiet, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Inside the cabin, life began to settle into a rhythm, gentle at first, then warm in ways neither Ezra nor Seraphina expected. Each morning, Ezra rose before dawn. Years of habit pulled him from bed long before the sun considered rising. He kept the fire alive, brewed his bitter mountain tea, and checked the traps along the tree line. But now, when he returned home, there was something new waiting for him. A candle lit in the window, the soft sound of quiet footsteps inside, and the scent of something warm simmering over the hearth. Seraphina always rose soon after him, determined to contribute. She swept the floors, washed the dishes, and prepared breakfast with a shy pride, eggs and biscuits when flour allowed, or warm porridge with honey. Ezra pretended not to notice her trying extra hard, but he noticed everything. He noticed the way she hummed under her breath when she cooked, the way she tied her hair back, revealing soft cheeks and kind eyes, the way she glanced at him when she thought he wasn't looking, half curious, half careful, as if she feared she might frighten him away. One morning, as they ate in companionable silence, Seraphina asked, "Do you ever get lonely up here?" Ezra's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Lonely comes with the territory." "Does it hurt?" she ventured, voice barely above a whisper. Ezra set his fork down. "Only when I think too much." Seraphina traced the rim of her cup. "You think too much often?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "More than a man should." They shared a quiet laugh. It was small, but it reached places inside Ezra that hadn't felt warmth in decades. Later that afternoon, Ezra decided to teach her how to chop wood. It wasn't necessary. He could easily handle it himself, but he could tell she wanted to learn. And there was something about her determination that stirred his respect. "First rule," he said, placing the axe in her hands. "Don't fight the wood. Let the blade do the work." Seraphina adjusted her stance, breathing nervously. "What if I miss?" "Then you'll learn how not to miss," Ezra replied. She swung, too hard, too tense. The axe bounced off the log and nearly threw her forward. Ezra caught her from behind, steadying her. His hands closed around her arms, guiding her posture. The closeness was accidental, but the effect was immediate. Seraphina's breath hitched. Ezra felt her stiffen in surprise. "You're trying to overpower it," he murmured near her ear. "Don't. Relax your shoulders." Seraphina nodded shakily. He stepped back, giving her space. The next swing landed clean, splitting the log in two. She gasped in delight. "I did it!" Ezra smiled, the kind of real smile that warmed the lines on his face. "That you did." She beamed at him, and something inside him softened, like frost melting under sunlight. As days passed, she helped him repair the roof, sweep snow off the porch, and tend the chickens behind the cabin. At night, they sat by the fire. Ezra read aloud from old books, stories he'd read 100 times, but somehow they felt different with her listening. Her head tilted, eyes soft, his voice steady, deep, unexpectedly gentle, the fire crackling between them. There was comfort in the routine, safety in the repetition, and a warmth neither dared name. But with warmth came fear. Ezra felt it creeping in during quiet moments. When Seraphina laughed, when she leaned close to look at a book he held, when she touched his arm to ask a question. He had lived long enough to know what attachment could do to a man. One evening, she sat cross-legged on the rug by the fire, mending one of his shirts with careful stitches. Ezra watched her from the table, pretending to carve a new handle for his knife. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I want to," she replied without looking up. "You've given me a place to stay. Safety I never had. Let me at least take care of something of yours." Ezra swallowed. "You don't owe me anything, Serafina." She paused, lifting her gaze to him. "Ezra, I'm not doing it because I owe you. I'm doing it because it feels good to help someone who's been kind to me." Her sincerity unsettled him. He stood abruptly. "I need some air." Outside, the cold bit into his skin, but it couldn't compete with the turmoil twisting inside him. He leaned on the porch railing, staring out across the snow-covered clearing. He was 58 years old, a broken man stitched together by solitude and memory. What right did he have to want anything more, to care, to hope? Inside, he heard the door creak open. "Ezra?" Serafina's voice was soft, hesitant. He didn't turn around. "You should stay inside. It's freezing." "I don't care," she whispered. "I'm worried about you." Something in her voice, tender, trembling, made him finally face her. She stepped closer, snow crunching beneath her boots. Her cheeks were flushed from heat and emotion. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. "No," he said immediately. "No, you didn't." "Then why do you look like you're running from me?" Ezra flinched as if struck. "I'm not running." "Yes, you are," she said gently. "Not with your legs, with your heart." He stared at her, stunned. Serafina took a step closer. "If you don't want me here, if I'm making things harder, just tell me. I can leave." Ezra's expression darkened with something raw. "Don't say that." "Then tell me what's wrong." Ezra exhaled, breath shaking in the cold air. "I haven't cared about anyone in decades, not like this, not with this fear in my chest. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you, and I'm an old man who's lost everything." She shook her head, eyes shining. "You haven't lost me." "That's exactly what scares me," he whispered. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Serafina stepped close enough for their breaths to mingle. "Ezra," she said softly, "you saved my life. You gave me safety. You gave me dignity when no one else ever had. You don't have to be young to matter. You don't have to be perfect to be wanted." He swallowed hard. "You're not too old," she finished. "You're just Ezra, and that's enough." His voice was barely audible. "For you?" She reached out and touched his hand, slowly, giving him every chance to pull away. "For me," she whispered, "it's more than enough." Ezra closed his eyes, letting the warmth of her touch settle deep into his bones. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel it, hope, fragile and frightening and overwhelming. And he didn't run. Spring thaw came slowly to the mountains. Snow melted in rivulets down the rocky slopes, revealing patches of brown earth and green shoots pushing toward sunlight. Life returned to the valley, but with it came the uneasy feeling that peace could not last forever. Serafina sensed the change before Ezra did, a prickling at the back of her neck, a tension in the air that didn't match the quiet beauty around them. Whenever she fetched water from the stream, she glanced behind her. Whenever she fed the chickens, she paused to listen. Ezra noticed. One evening, as she chopped vegetables by the fire, he asked, "You're jumpier than a deer at dawn. What's troubling you?" She froze mid-slice. "I thought I saw someone in the trees this morning." Ezra stilled. "Human or animal?" "I don't know. I just felt watched." Ezra rose from his chair, retrieving his rifle from above the fireplace. His voice dropped into that low, steady register she had come to trust. Next time you see anything, you tell me right away." Seraphina nodded, though worry etched into her brow. As the days passed, small signs accumulated. Tracks in the snow not made by deer or elk, a snapped branch too clean to be from wind, footprints fading near the tree line. Ezra's instincts sharpened. He started circling the cabin at night, lantern in hand, rifle slung over his shoulder. He checked the traps more frequently, scouted the trail leading to town, and kept Seraphina close whenever they gathered firewood. He wasn't a paranoid man, but he'd lived long enough to know when danger was circling. One afternoon, Seraphina found him repairing the hinges on the front door, his movements brisk and focused. "Ezra?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Your father isn't a man who lets things go, not if he thinks you still owe him." Seraphina's breath hitched. "Do you think he's coming?" "I think he's already sent someone." She sank onto the bench, hands trembling. "I knew it was too good to last. Peace never lasts for people like me." Ezra set down his tools and knelt in front of her. "Seraphina, look at me." She lifted her gaze reluctantly. "You are not what he said you are," Ezra said firmly. "You are not worthless. You are not property. And you will not be dragged back into that life." Her lower lip trembled. "But he's my father." "Then he should have protected you," Ezra replied, "not sold you." The softness in his voice undid her. She leaned into him and he held her, feeling her shoulders shake as she pressed her face into his coat. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper. "I'm scared." "I know," he murmured, "but you're not facing him alone." For a time, she believed him. 3 nights later, fear returned with teeth. It was just after dusk. Seraphina had stepped outside to gather laundry she'd hung earlier when she froze mid-step. The woods beyond the clearing were too quiet. No wind, no birds, just a heavy stillness. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement behind the trees, a silhouette, broad shoulders, a glint of metal. Her heart lurched. She ran for the cabin. "Ezra!" she cried, bursting through the door. "Someone's out there." Ezra reacted instantly. He blew out the lamp, grabbed his rifle, and pushed her behind him. "Stay low. Stay quiet." The cabin dropped into near darkness, lit only by the faint glow of the fire's embers. Ezra moved silently toward the window, peering through the narrow gap between the shutters. A shadow shifted outside. He cursed under his breath. "Damn it, they're closer than I thought." "Who?" Seraphina whispered. Ezra looked at her, eyes grim. "Bounty hunters, not just any. Professionals. Men who won't leave without a prize." Seraphina's breath came in shallow gasps. "I can't go back, Ezra. I can't." He cupped her cheek with a rough, steady hand. "You won't." But fear had already taken root. "If they kill you, if they take me, Ezra, I'll die." He pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. It was the first time he'd kissed her without hesitation. "I'm not losing you," he whispered. Before she could answer, a voice outside bellowed across the clearing. "Thornwood! We know she's in there. Hand her over." Seraphina's blood turned cold. Ezra stepped in front of her. "Get into the back room. Barricade the door." "No," she whispered fiercely. "I'm not hiding while you fight alone." Ezra stared at her, torn between fear and pride. "This isn't your battle." "Yes, it is," she said, "because losing you would destroy me." Ezra exhaled hard, half pain, half surrender. "Stay close and do exactly what I say." Outside, another shout cut through the cold air. "Last warning!" Ezra steadied his rifle. "They won't breach the front door without a fight." Serafina grabbed the second rifle he'd taught her to use, checking the chamber with trembling fingers. "Serafina," Ezra began. She met his gaze. "I'm not leaving you." A beat of silence passed between them, raw, fragile, powerful. Then Ezra nodded, a fierce protectiveness burning in his eyes. "Then we stand together." The cabin went still around them. Ezra Thornwood, the man who thought himself too old for hope, felt something ignite in his chest. Not fear, not regret, but resolve. Because for the first time in decades, he had something, someone, to fight for. And God helped the men who tried to take her. Snow began falling again, thick, heavy flakes spiraling through the cold night air as though the mountain itself were holding its breath. The world outside the cabin faded into white silence, broken only by the crunch of approaching boots. Ezra's jaw tightened. Serafina stood beside him, clutching the rifle he had taught her to use. Her hands trembled, but her eyes held fire. A rough voice echoed from the edge of the clearing. "Ezra Thornwood, we're taking the girl back to Blackwater. Move aside, old man." Ezra shouted back, "She's not going anywhere. Turn around while you still can." Laughter answered him, cruel and confident. Old bones shouldn't make promises they can't keep. Ezra motioned Serafina to the side of the window. "Stay low. Aim only if you have to." She nodded, breath trembling, but she didn't step away from him. The first gunshot shattered the stillness. Ezra pulled her close, shielding her as wood splintered from the doorframe. Another shot followed, then another. The cabin shuddered under the barrage. Serafina whispered, "They're going to break through. Ezra, we can't hold them forever." "We won't need forever," Ezra murmured, steadying his rifle. "Just long enough." He slid to the window, fired a single shot, and one of the shadows outside crumpled into the snow. A furious shout rose from the trees. "You'll pay for that!" The remaining men spread out, circling the cabin. Ezra recognized the tactic. Smart, practiced. These weren't local drunks with pistols. These were hired killers. He gritted his teeth. Damn Silas, he paid well for this. Serafina touched his arm. "Ezra, if they kill you because of me—" He turned sharply, eyes blazing. "Don't ever say that. You didn't bring danger here. Your father did, and I won't let him take you back to hell." Another crash sounded at the back of the cabin, someone trying to break the kitchen door. Ezra jerked toward it, but Serafina grabbed his sleeve. "I'll cover the front. Go!" He hesitated only a heartbeat. "Be careful." He sprinted to the back as Serafina crouched near the hearth, rifle aimed at the front door. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Every breath felt like fire. She had never killed a man, never pointed a gun at a person with the intent to stop them. But if someone entered that door, she would not let them take Ezra. Outside, one of the bounty hunters kicked the door again, and the hinges groaned. Ezra braced himself on the opposite side. The door burst inward. A burly man lunged at him with a knife, but Ezra blocked the blow, slamming the rifle butt into the man's jaw. They wrestled, bodies crashing into shelves and barrels. "Ezra!" Serafina cried, hearing the struggle. "I'm fine. Hold your position!" He shouted back, voice strained. The man drove an elbow into Ezra's ribs. Pain exploded through him. Ezra stumbled, but caught himself, twisting the attacker's wrist until the knife fell. With a final shove, he slammed the man against the wall and knocked him unconscious. He was panting hard, too hard. Blood seeped from a fresh cut at his side. "Ezra!" Serafina's voice wavered with fear. "I'm all right," he gasped, but his knees buckled for a moment. Before she could reach him, the front door crashed open. A tall man stormed inside, revolver raised. "Move, girl!" Seraphina's heart nearly stopped. She steadied the rifle, breath trembling. "I'm not going with you," she whispered. The man sneered. "You don't have a choice." She pulled the trigger. The gun kicked back against her shoulder, louder than she expected. The bullet struck his arm, knocking him to the floor with a howl of pain. Ezra rushed forward despite his injury, kicking the gun away and pinning the man down. The bounty hunter glared at Seraphina with venom. "Your father said you'd be trouble. Should have known the fat ones always are." Ezra's hand tightened around the man's collar. "Call her that again," he growled, "and it'll be the last word you ever say." The man fell silent. Outside, the last hunter shouted, panic in his voice, fall back now." The crunching footsteps faded into the woods until the mountains swallowed the sound completely. Silence returned, thick and trembling with the echo of violence. Seraphina dropped the rifle and ran to Ezra. "You're hurt." He sagged into her arms, breathing raggedly. "Just a scratch?" "You're bleeding," she insisted, guiding him toward the bed. "You could have died." Ezra cupped her cheek with a blood-stained hand. "I told you, Seraphina, I'm not losing you. Not now, not ever." She pressed her forehead to his, tears slipping free. "And I'm not letting you die for me." Ezra's voice softened to a whisper. "Then stay with me. Not because you're hiding, not because you're scared, but because we're stronger together." Seraphina's heart swelled with fierce, trembling love. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "Not as long as you want me." Ezra brushed his thumb across her cheek. "I want you," he said softly, "more than I ever thought I could want anything again." The cabin sat in shadows around them, the fire flickering low. Outside, danger retreated into the trees. Inside, something deeper, stronger, unbreakable settled between them. Love forged in fear, fire, and survival. Morning came slowly, pale gold pushing aside the last gray traces of night. The snow around the cabin was torn with footprints and blood, signs of the violence that had nearly taken everything from them. But inside, the air was warm. The fire crackled softly. The world felt strangely still, as though holding its breath for what came next. Seraphina sat beside Ezra on the bed, carefully wrapping clean bandages around his ribs. Her touch was gentle but firm, and Ezra didn't flinch, not because it didn't hurt, but because her hands on him felt like safety. "You should rest," she whispered. "You fought too hard last night." Ezra gave a tired laugh. "I'm too old to be wrestling full-grown men in a snowstorm." Her eyes softened, full of affection. "You're not too old. You're brave, you're strong, and you're alive. That's all that matters." Ezra lifted a hand and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm alive because of you. You fought like hell, Sarah." She looked down, cheeks warm. "I was scared, but losing you terrified me more." Ezra studied her for a long moment, this woman who had stumbled into his life from the edge of death, who had woken a part of him he thought had died decades ago. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you know you don't have to stay here. You're free now. Your father hired killers because he wanted to control you, but he can't reach you here anymore. You could go anywhere." The thought should have been liberating. Instead, Seraphina felt a hollow ache at the idea of leaving. "Do you want me to go?" she asked. Ezra's breath caught. "God, no. I just don't want you to stay because you feel obligated. I want you to stay because—" She pressed her finger softly to his lips. "I'm staying because I choose you, not out of fear, not out of need, out of love. Ezra's eyes warmed, the lines around them deepening with something tender. He took her hand from his lips and held it in his own, rough knuckles brushing her soft skin. "You're the first thing that's made this cabin feel like a home again," he murmured. "When you walked through that door, half frozen and terrified, I thought I was just giving a stranger shelter. I didn't know I was saving myself, too." Serafina leaned into him, resting her forehead against his. "Then let's build something here, together, slowly. No promises we can't keep, just one day at a time, if you'll have me." Ezra closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 30 years. "It's your home now," he said softly, "if you want it." Tears gathered in Serafina's eyes, not of fear, not of pain, but of relief, of belonging. She slipped her arms gently around him, mindful of his injuries, and he held her close despite the ache in his ribs. Outside, the mountains stood tall and silent, ancient and unchanging. But inside the little cabin, something new had taken root, a fragile, tender thing that felt both terrifying and indestructible. Love that didn't care about age, love that didn't need perfection, love that had survived the storm. And as the fire glowed warm against the wooden walls, Serafina whispered the words she had been holding in her heart. "I'm home, Ezra. Truly home." Every time you listen to stories like this, I'm reminded of how powerful it is when people from different places and different lives come together for a moment of shared emotion. Maybe you're listening on a quiet night, maybe on a long drive, maybe somewhere far from these snowy mountains, but you're here, and that connection matters. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. Your comments help these stories travel farther than any wagon trail or mountain path ever could. And if you still believe love can find us at any age, in any form, don't go far. The next story is already on its way.